Do that again, please, baby. Just one more time. Claire Whitaker's voice shattered in the middle of the therapy center courtyard, her hands trembling in the air between reaching and not daring to touch. Because for the first time in 3 years, her son had spoken, and not to her, not to a doctor, not to anyone who had spent thousands of hours trying to pull a single word from him, but to a stranger kneeling in the sand tying a little girl's shoe as if the moment were ordinary and not the kind that split a life cleanly into before and after. And Claire, who had negotiated billion-dollar contracts without blinking, who had walked into hostile boardrooms and come out with signatures in control and victory, found herself unable to do the simplest thing in the world, which was breathe, because Ethan had just said something. Her Ethan who had not spoken since the night everything in their lives had come apart, and she had heard it clearly, unmistakably, a small fragile word that barely existed in the air and yet carried the weight of every silent day that had come before it. And now it was gone again, swallowed back into the same quiet that had defined him for years as he stood there looking at the man in front of him with wide, uncertain eyes, as if he had revealed something he was not supposed to reveal. And Claire dropped to her knees on the rough pavement, without caring about the way it scraped through her stockings, or the way a few people nearby had already turned to look. Because none of that existed anymore. Not the watching eyes, not the careful professional composure she wore like armor in every other part of her life. Not even the version of herself that knew how to handle a crisis. Because this was not a crisis she could manage. It was something far more terrifying, something she had wanted so badly that now that it had happened, she was afraid to move too quickly and scared away. Ethan, she whispered, her voice breaking into pieces she could not hold. Together, say it again, sweetheart, just one more time. But he didn't. He only shifted slightly, his fingers tightening briefly around the fabric of the stranger's sleeve before letting go, as if even that small connection had suddenly become too much. And Claire felt the hope that had flared so violently inside her flicker into something fragile and uncertain, the kind that hurt more than having none at all, because she had lived for 3 years in a world where silence was at least predictable, where the absence of his voice had become a constant she could build her life around. But this single word, had changed the rules without warning, and she didn't yet know how to survive in a world where it might happen again or might not. Where the answer was no longer no, but maybe. And maybe was infinitely more dangerous. The stranger, Daniel, she would later learn, had not moved during any of it, had not reacted the way most people would have with surprise or excitement or the kind of encouragement that always felt slightly too eager, too heavy. He had simply stayed where he was, one knee still pressed into the sand, one hand resting loosely on the tied shoelace, as if finishing the knot could wait, his posture steady, his presence quiet in a way that did not demand anything from Ethan. And something about that stillness made Claire hesitate, made her stop herself from filling the silence with more words, more pleading, more attempts to pull something back that had already slipped away. And for a moment the three of them remained there in a strange suspended space, the noise of the rest of the courtyard dimming into something distant and unimportant, children laughing somewhere behind them, a therapist calling out instructions, a door opening and closing, all of it continuing as if nothing extraordinary had happened, while Claire felt as though the ground beneath her had shifted in a way that would never settle back into place again. And in that suspended moment her mind did what it always did when she was faced with something she could not immediately control. It went backward, searching for the origin point, the place where everything had changed, because Ethan had not always been silent. He had once been a child who talked in soft bursts of curiosity, who asked questions about everything from why the sky changed color at sunset to whether dogs had dreams, who had filled their home with small, constant sounds that Claire had not realized were extraordinary until they disappeared. And they had disappeared on a night that still lived inside her like something unfinished, a night when voices had been raised too high, when words had been said that could not be taken back, when a door had closed with a finality she had not believed in until it became real. And Ethan had been there, small and awake and listening in the way children always are even when adults convince themselves otherwise. And the next morning the house had been full of people speaking too carefully, moving too gently, touching Ethan's head as if he were something fragile that might break under the wrong kind of attention. And somewhere in the middle of that carefully managed grief, his voice had simply stopped, not all at once, but in a gradual retreat, fewer words, then none, until the silence became complete and immovable. And Claire had done what she knew how to do when faced with a problem that refused to resolve itself. She had built a system around it, the best specialists, the most respected therapists, schedules and routines, and measurable goals, progress reports, and clinical language that made it all feel like something that could eventually be solved if she just applied enough precision, enough effort, enough control. But none of it had reached him, not really, and now, standing in the courtyard with her knees pressed into the ground, and her heart still racing from the sound of a single word, Claire realized with a clarity that felt almost unbearable that whatever had just happened had not come from anything she had built. It had come from something else entirely, something unstructured and unplanned and completely outside the system she had spent years constructing, and that terrified her in a way she could not immediately name, because if she had not caused it, she did not know how to make it happen again, and if she could not make it happen again, she had no control over whether she would ever hear her son's voice a second time, and the thought of that, of having been given one brief, impossible glimpse of what she had lost only to lose it again, was almost more than she could bear. In the days after the courtyard moment, Claire tried to approach what had happened the only way she knew how, by analyzing it, breaking it down, searching for a pattern she could control, but the truth was there hadn't been one, just a quiet man kneeling in the sand, speaking easily to his daughter as if nothing in the world needed fixing, and somehow that had reached Ethan in a way years of specialists never had, and that unsettled her more than she expected, because it meant the answer might exist outside the system she had built so carefully around her son. So she adjusted her schedule without announcing it, arriving earlier, lingering longer, positioning herself where she could observe without interfering, telling herself she was just being present while knowing she was watching for Daniel, for that same unforced presence. And at first nothing happened. Ethan returned to his usual silence, staying at the edges, watching more than engaging, and Claire almost convinced herself she had imagined the whole thing until the small shifts began, subtle enough to miss if you weren't looking. Ethan sitting a little closer to Daniel and his daughter Lily, not joining them, just near them, listening as Lily filled the air with constant chatter, and Daniel responded in that same calm, steady tone, never pushing, never performing, just being there. And Ethan listened with a kind of focus Claire hadn't seen in years, his body angled toward them, his attention anchored, and that alone felt fragile and important, something she didn't want to disturb, but wanting that and actually resisting the urge to manage it were different things. And within a week, she found herself approaching Daniel near the supply room, explaining what had happened, what it had meant, and then carefully asking if he would spend more time with Ethan, not officially, just intentionally. And Daniel listened quietly before shaking his head, not unkindly, just certain. If it happened because it felt real, trying to plan it might break it, he said. And Claire wasn't used to hearing no like that, simple and unmovable, without negotiation. And for a moment she didn't know how to respond because in her world, more effort usually meant better results, not worse ones. But she nodded anyway, stepping back, telling herself she would respect that boundary. And for a while she did, letting the afternoons unfold naturally, watching Ethan inch closer in small, meaningful ways, handing Lily a toy before she asked, standing beside them instead of apart, even sitting close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. And each of those moments felt like progress she didn't fully understand but didn't want to interfere with, until the rest of her life intruded, as it always did, in the form of perception and expectation, when a business magazine published a candid photo of her in the courtyard talking to Daniel, and what might have been nothing in another context became something in hers, her COO, raising concerns about optics, about narratives forming without context. And Claire listened because she had built her career on understanding exactly that, and without fully deciding to, she adjusted, arriving at different times, keeping her distance, making every interaction brief and professional, telling herself it was necessary, responsible. But almost immediately she saw the effect ripple outward, not just in Daniel, who stepped back as well, but in Ethan, who grew quieter in a different way, more withdrawn, more closed off, as if something that had been slowly opening was beginning to seal itself again. and Claire recognized it with a sinking clarity she couldn't ignore. That this time, the silence wasn't something she was trying to fix, it was something she might have caused. The event was supposed to be simple, controlled, structured, predictable, but the moment the noise rose past a certain point, Claire saw it happen in real time. Ethan's body going still, then rigid, then overwhelmed in that quiet, internal way that didn't draw attention until it was already too late, and her instincts took over immediately. The same instincts that had built her career. She started giving directions, signaling staff, trying to clear space and restore order, but even as she did it, she saw the effect it had on him. The way it only made everything feel bigger, faster, more out of control. And then Daniel was there, not rushing, not interrupting, just stepping in and sitting down on the ground nearby, pulling Lily close and beginning to talk about something completely ordinary, something small and steady that didn't demand anything from anyone, creating a pocket of calm without announcing it. And Ethan noticed. Of course he noticed, his eyes locking onto that stillness like it was the only stable thing in the world. And then, slowly, he moved toward it, each step uncertain but deliberate until he reached Daniel and grabbed onto his shirt with both hands, as if holding on to something that might disappear. And when he spoke this time, it wasn't a whisper that could be mistaken or missed. It was small but clear, present in a way it hadn't been before. "Don't make him go." And the words landed with a weight that Claire felt all the way through her, because she understood instantly that he wasn't talking about the moment in front of them. He was talking about something much older, something that had never been said out loud until now. And for the first time in years, she didn't try to fix it, didn't try to control the situation or move it toward resolution. She just stood there and let it be what it was, and that choice followed her home that night, where she sat beside Ethan on his bed without a plan, without a script, and told him the truth she had avoided for years, that she had been scared that night too, that she hadn't known how to handle it, that she might have left him alone in something he shouldn't have had to face by himself. And the moment she said it, something in him broke open, not quietly, not carefully, but completely, and she held him through it without trying to stop it. And when he finally pulled back, his voice trembling but real, he asked the question that had been holding everything in place. "Will you be mad if I talk?" And Claire didn't try to stay composed this time, didn't filter or manage the emotion. She just told him the truth, that his voice was the one thing she had never stopped waiting for, and that it had never been something to fear. And from there it didn't return all at once, not in some perfect, finished way, but in pieces, a word here, a sound there, each one fragile and hard one but real. And a week later, back in the courtyard where it had all begun, Ethan stood beside her, looked toward Daniel, and asked in a careful, steady voice, "Can he stay?" And Claire felt the weight of everything they had been through settle into that single question, not about the afternoon, not about the moment, but about what came next. And for once, she didn't overthink it, didn't measure or calculate. She just looked at Daniel and said, simply, "We could start with dinner." Not as a solution, not as a strategy, but as something honest and unplanned. And Daniel nodded, just as simply, and nothing about it was dramatic or final or perfectly resolved. But it didn't need to be, because for the first time in years, Claire wasn't trying to control what happened next. She was just allowing it to begin.